What's going on, guys? It's the Draft Nerd, and we are finally back, and today we're going to be doing an updated 2025 NFL mock draft. So the order at the top of the draft has changed up a little bit. The Giants kind of screwed themselves by winning the game against the Colts and knocking them out of playoff contention. They no longer hold the number one overall pick, and our new holder of the number one overall pick, and will probably be the finalized number one pick holder, is the New England Patriots, followed by the Titans, Browns, Giants, and then the Jaguars. So without further ado, this should be a fun one. Let's get into it. Alright, so coming in at number one, we got the New England Patriots, and we're still not going to be doing any trades until the order has at least somewhat finalized. I might do a mock draft with trades during the playoffs. But, until the top, 15, 16 picks are finalized, I'm not going to be doing trades because I think it's a little bit pointless. So this might be the last mock draft without trades. We'll see. But just to let you know, there are no trades in this mock draft. I don't want to see any comments saying, why did this team not trade down or why did this team not trade up? And with the New England Patriots on the clock right now, I think the obvious pick has to be Travis Hunter. They're obviously not going to draft a quarterback here, number one overall. They got their quarterback in Drake May, who's looked very, very good. So really now it's just about whether or not you get a, athletic weapon in a Travis Hunter who could play, cornerback, receiver, whichever one you want him to play. Or do you try to fix that offensive line? Now, I know a lot of, Patriots fans want to fix that offensive line, but you got to realize what this draft class's strengths are. Offensive line, there is no Joe Alt in this draft class. If we look at offensive tackles, we got Will Campbell, who's a really good offensive lineman, Kelvin Banks, and then maybe a Josh Simmons, but he's not really in this conversation. It's really going to be between Will Campbell and Kelvin Banks if you want to take an offensive lineman here with the number one overall pick. Will Campbell, there's talks that he might end up being a guard. He doesn't have the longest arms. I think he's a good tackle, but is he going to have the the length in the NFL to play tackle? He might be pushing into guard. Do you want to draft a guard number one overall? I wouldn't if I was the Patriots. Maybe if we were doing trades, we could have a team like the Raiders trade up, Patriots move back to 8 and then get their offensive lineman. But more realistically, just stick and pick and take the best overall player, which is Travis Hunter. You could pair him alongside with Christian Gonzalez, have, him play offense 10, 15 plays, learn certain packages and try to get a few explosive plays out of him on offense. I think that's, the route you should be going. There's always free agency too. You could get, an offensive lineman or two in free agency, could wait, could trade for one. I just think with this number one overall pick, you got to go Travis Hunter. He's the best player in the draft. Moving on to number 2, we got the Tennessee Titans, and Will Levis has had an up and down season. He started off terrible. He was on a legendary run with, meme-worthy pictures. And then he started to play well, where actually he got injured, came back, started to play pretty well for about a 2 to 3 week stretch, and then kind of went back to the old Will Levis. Did he show enough to me to warrant, the Titans going elsewhere with this pick? Not in my opinion. I think you got to go quarterback when you had the chance. And the Titans have their pick of the quarterback. Now, we all know this quarterback class isn't, fantastic. Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Jalen Milroe are probably the only quarterbacks in a first-round contention. And Jalen Milroe is very, very fringe first-round, in my opinion. So really it's between Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders. Which one do they want? And in my opinion, Cam Ward is the better player. He has the higher ceiling. He might have a lower floor than a guy like Shedeur Sanders, but when you're picking number 2, you want to take the swing. Cam Ward has, a pretty big arm. He's not the most athletic guy in the world, but he does have some athleticism. He's got, solid pocket presence, does hold on to the ball a little too long, but so does Shedeur Sanders. Overall, I think that Cam Ward is the better pick here. Most teams, except for maybe the Raiders, I think would choose Cam Ward over Shedeur Sanders, so we're going to go with Cam Ward here with the number 2 overall pick to the Titans. Coming in here at number 3, this is where it gets really interesting. The Browns are paying a quarterback a lot of money in Deshaun Watson. Has he been worth that money? No. Is there a way to get out of this contract as of right now? No. So the question is, do you just say screw Deshaun Watson and that money? We're going to, wash our hands with them, be in cap hell for a year or two, get our quarterback in a Shedeur Sanders, and just try to start this rebuild a little bit early? Or do you put it off for one more year, bring back Deshaun Watson, and probably suck next year, and then have a better chance with a what looks like a better quarterback class in 2026. And then maybe go with a guy like Tetairoa McMillan, Mason Graham, Abdul Carter, something like that, and just put off this quarterback situation for one more year. In my opinion, I think that's what they need to do. There's no getting out of that Deshaun Watson contract. You guys are stuck with that for another year or two minimum. You could maybe sign a Justin Fields. I don't necessarily know how much that would help you. You're spending more money on quarterback. I don't think that's realistic, but I think you bring back Deshaun Watson for one more year, and I know that's painful to hear, Browns fans, and you go ahead and get a weapon. Jerry Jeudy has looked like a really good receiver these past few weeks. He looks like he could be a number one-ish, or maybe even a high-end number two. Get a number one receiver in Tetairoa McMillan, and maybe that'll help Deshaun Watson out a little bit, give him some weapons. So we're going to go with Tetairoa McMillan, who's a big contested catch receiver, who I think could be a number one receiver on a lot of teams. Moving on to number 4 here, we got the New York Giants, and, by the grace of God, there is a quarterback that has fallen to them. They haven't completely screwed themselves. Now, if the Browns take Shedeur Sanders there at number 3, the Giants are really going to be in a tough situation. But luckily, that didn't happen in this mock draft. It might happen in others. I will be switching it up week after week. But this week and in this mock draft, Shedeur Sanders did fall to the Giants here at 4, and I think it's a no-brainer. You got to get a quarterback. You cannot go into next season without an answer at quarterback. The fan base just will not allow it. Trust me. Is Shedeur Sanders the most exciting quarterback to, put your faith behind? Maybe not. I mean, he doesn't have the highest ceiling, but he does have a pretty high floor. I think, worst case scenario, Shedeur Sanders can be a middling quarterback, maybe around that, top 15 conversation as a quarterback. He just doesn't have the athletic tools to, probably separate them. Best case scenario, he'll be a Joe Burrow. Worst case scenario, he's, not a very good starter, maybe like a Teddy Bridgewater type of player before the injury. Either way, I think the Giants gotta just take a swing and hope that Shedeur Sanders is closer to that Joe Burrow tier. Coming in here at number 5, we got the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I'm sure they were hoping that they kept that number 1 pick, or in that number 2 pick, number 3 pick, and hopefully got a Travis Hunter, because they both need cornerback and receiver, and that's exactly what Travis Hunter is. Unfortunately, that did not happen. They fell here to 5th. Travis Hunter isn't on the board. But there is a really, really good cornerback still on the board, which is something they desperately need. You could also go offensive lineman, like I talked about, and get a, Will Campbell, Kelvin Banks. But there is a very talented cornerback by the name of Will Johnson here at number 5, and we are going to take him. I think pairing him up with Tyson Campbell would be an absolutely great pairing. I think Will Johnson is going to be with the likes of a Derek Stingley, Sauce Gardner, guys that you take with those top 5 picks and could be absolutely shut down on one side of the field. I think Will Johnson is that type of player. Moving on here to number 6, we have the Carolina Panthers, and Bryce Young, he's been playing pretty good football here lately. I think he's played a little too good for them to consider quarterback here at number 6, especially with the top 2 quarterbacks off the board. With that being said, I think they need to shift their focuses to the defense. They have little to no pass rush. Secondary is not very great either. I really think they need to take best player available on the defensive end. Now, is that a Mason Graham? Yeah, probably. But I'm also looking at Abdul Carter. Don't forget, they have Derek Brown, who, isn't a, pass rush specialist on the interior of that defensive line, but he's a very good defensive tackle who they will be getting back, who they lost in like game 1 or 2 of the season. They don't have any edge rushers that I get excited about. And Abdul Carter, I get excited about. I think he could be a very good pass rusher in the NFL one day. So we're going to try to help boost that pass rush with Abdul Carter going to the Panthers. Moving on to number 7, we got the New York Jets, and again, maybe a quarterback needy team. It depends on what Aaron Rodgers decides to do. I have a hard time believing he'll be back on the Jets next season. I think he'll either retire or go to a different team. I don't really think he'll be on the Jets next season. That being said, I don't think they need to, hurry up and rush to get a quarterback. Go into next season with a bridge quarterback, and then, take a shot on either a Arch Manning, a Nico, there's other quarterbacks. It looks like it's going to be a solid quarterback class in 2026, and I think they're going to wait their turn in that draft class as opposed to this one. So with that being said, I think they go with Mason Graham, who probably a little too good to be falling here to number 7. I think he has the potential to be the best player in this draft, along with, a Travis Hunter and a Will Johnson. I think Mason Graham's an absolute steal here at 7, and it just shores up that defensive line even more, which has a lot of talent. Moving on to number 8, we got the Las Vegas Raiders, and man, they are in a tough situation because they desperately need a quarterback. They're in the similar boat to the Giants, where their fan base probably won't allow them to, go into next season without an answer to the quarterback position. And Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell are not answers to that quarterback position. Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward are off the board. I did say there is one other quarterback worth taking in the first round. Do I think he's worth a top 8 pick? No. But the Raiders are in a tough situation. I could definitely see them, offering a whole lot of assets to the Patriots to try to trade up to that number 1 spot. But again, there's no trades in this mock draft, so we are going to take Jalen Milroe here at number 8. Is it a bit of a reach? Probably, but the Raiders have put themselves in this situation. The only other answer I see is to either sign maybe a Sam Darnold in free agency if the Vikings decide to let him go with J.J. McCarthy, or maybe a Justin Fields. But I'm not going to sit here and predict free agency moves this early on into the season, so we are going to go with the Jalen Milroe here at number 8 overall to the Raiders. Moving on to number 9, we got the Chicago Bears, and that is very simple. How this board's fallen, they need to get Caleb Williams some protection, and we're going to go with either Will Campbell or Kelvin Banks. Do I think Will Campbell could stick at tackle? I think he probably could, but I think he could be a very good guard in the NFL. As the likes of a Peter Skoronski, if you remember him from a couple years ago, who played tackle in college but profiled as a very good guard in the NFL. I think Will Campbell is very similar, and I think that's exactly the type of player the Bears need to bring onto their team. So we're going to go with Will Campbell there at number 9. Moving on to number 10, we got the New Orleans Saints, and you could go a few different directions here, but they also need offensive line help desperately. They took a really good player in Talise Fuanga from last year. I think they go offensive line again, and I think they go with Kelvin Banks. He can also project to guard, but I think he's more likely to stick at tackle than a Will Campbell. So now you got Talise Fuanga and Kelvin Banks Jr. I think you got 2 really good either tackles or offensive linemen for a very long time. Moving on to number 11, we got the San Francisco 49ers, and same thing, Trent Williams. He's up there in age, dealt with injuries this year. Maybe Father Time's finally catching up to him. And with that being said, I think that the 49ers are also going to have to get a offensive lineman. So we're going to have a little bit of a run on tackles with Will Campbell, Kelvin Banks Jr., and then I'm going to have the 49ers taking Josh Simmons. He was banged up this season, but before he got injured, he was playing very good football for Ohio State. And I think even with the injury, I think he played himself into first-round contention. And I think he's a good fit here for the 49ers here at number 11. Moving on to number 12, we got the Indianapolis Colts. And there's a few spots I like going here. Malachi Starks, who's one of the best players in the draft, although he does play safety. I think he's a good fit for the Colts. I think he could go with one of the 2 tight ends in a Colston Loveland or a Tyler Warren. That's a very popular pick, but ultimately, I'm going to decide to go with, a bit of a versatile piece on that defense. Most likely an edge rusher. I guess he'll be listed as linebacker, though. We're going to go with Jalen Walker here. Do I like him a lot better as an edge rusher? Yes. Pairing him up with Leatu Latu. Again, Kwity Paye hasn't shown me much to be willing to keep him as a, long-term option on defense. Getting a Jalen Walker who could also drop back into coverage, could play a little bit of linebacker, drop back into coverage, but really rush that passer. I really like that on the Colts. So we're going to go with Jalen Walker there at number 12. Moving on to 13, here we have the Dallas Cowboys. And, the very, very popular pick is to go with Ashton Jeanty, which is probably what I'm going to do. But I also want to shed some light on the, possibility of Luther Burden going to the Cowboys here at 13. Brandon Cooks is cooked, no pun intended. They don't really have a receiver too, behind CeeDee Lamb. So really, you could go with receiver here as well. Getting Dak Prescott some more weapons to throw to is very, very, very real possibility. But you can't pass up on Ashton Jeanty. If I know Jerry Jones is going to want to get another really good running back in that building, and I think Ashton Jeanty is that type of player. So we're going to go with Ashton Jeanty to the Cowboys, which is what everyone does, but I do think it's a very real possibility. Moving on to 14 here, we got the Arizona Cardinals on the clock, and I think that they need to focus on the interior of that defensive line. They took a really good player who I, liked a lot in Darius Robinson. There we go. I think they could take another player somewhat similar to him with Shamar Stewart. I believe he's 290? Yeah, 6'6", 290, bit of a tweener with that size, but I think he's a very versatile piece and could add a lot of pass rush production to that Cardinals defensive line. Moving on to 15 here, we got the Miami Dolphins, and I always struggle to find a spot for Malaki Starks to go to, and I think the Dolphins are one of the real possibilities he goes to. They could also go offensive line here. I think that's probably their biggest need, but it just seems like the Dolphins don't like taking offensive line in the first round. I mean, they get the ball out quick when they're fully healthy with, Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill. Tua Tagovailoa doesn't really need to be protected for that long. It's more of a quick pass offense. Maybe that's why they don't value it as much. If it was me, I would try to go offensive line here, but if I'm going to be real, it's probably not, and I think Malaki Starks is a good option there. I think he's along the same tier as a Kyle Hamilton from a few years ago. I think Kyle Hamilton was a bit of a better prospect, but Malaki Starks isn't far behind. That's the type of talent Malaki Starks is. Moving on to 16, here we got the Cincinnati Bengals, and they're most likely going to be losing T. Higgins in free agency. The Bengals have always had two really good receivers with, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. And although Luther Burden isn't T. Higgins size-wise and play-style-wise, again, Luther Burden's only 5'11", 208, a little bit more similar to a Jamar Chase, but I still think it's very important to get two really good receivers for Joe Burrow to throw to. Again, Luther Burden isn't the same player as T. Higgins, but I think he could be just as good as a receiving threat. So having Jamar Chase, Luther Burden, and then hopefully like a Jermaine Burton, I think that's a really good trio at receiver. So we're going to go with Luther Burden to the Bengals there at 16. Moving on to 17 here, we got the Atlanta Falcons. Very, very simple. Get pass rush help. There's a lot still on the board. You got a Nick Scoreton, Michael Williams, James Pierce, LT Overton. You even got some defensive interior guys like a Walter Nolan, Kenneth Grant. Get pass rush help. That's the biggest need for him. And I'm going to go with James Pierce Jr. Bit of a slow start to the season. Really turned it up once he got into that SEC play. Is he a bit of a raw player? Yes. Is he a bit of a small player? Yes. 6'5", 243. Not the heaviest guy in the world. But he's a lightning bolt off that edge. And if he's able to refine some pass rush moves, I think he could be a top edge rusher in the league one day. So we're going to go with him there at 17 to the Falcons. Moving on to 18 here, we got the Seahawks. And, again, a pretty easy pick here. I think you got to go offensive line here. We still got some pretty good offensive tackles like Ariante Urzuri, Wyatt Milam, and a Cameron Williams. I think one of these three players got to go here at 18. And I'm a really big Wyatt Milam guy. I didn't start off the season a big fan of him, but he's really played amazing for him for West Virginia. So I think we could go with Wyatt Milam. Play him at right tackle just because Abraham Lucas, deals with a lot of injuries almost every season. And he's also not the best to begin with. So I think getting an upgrade with Wyatt Milam is really, really good for the Seahawks. Moving on to 19 here, we got the Texans, and there's a few options we could go here. Again, Joe Mixon isn't, a spring chicken. He's, on the older side for, running backs at least. And there's a lot of good running backs here. Marion Hampton, Caleb Johnson, Quinshon Judkins, just to name a few. Is it possible they take him here at 19? Definitely. They're, worth that pick. But there's so many good running backs. I think the Texans could wait till day 2 of the draft to address that need. They also really need offensive line. And they also need defensive line help. I think that this pick is more likely going to be a trenches pick, whether that's offense or defense, as opposed to a running back. And there's a really good player that I'm a massive fan of that I think isn't very high on this, mock draft board. That's Derek Harmon. Derek Harmon is an absolute monster for Oregon, 6'5", 310, and he's a very good pass rusher, very good run stopper. I think he's just an all-around really good player. So don't look at that 82 ranked, Texans fans. He's a very good player. I think he's a top 25-ish player in the draft. So we're going to go with Derek Harmon out of Oregon for the Texans. Moving on to 20, we got the Denver Broncos, and I think this could be a receiver pick. We've only had 2 receivers go off the board, and over in Denver, you got Cortland Sutton, and then you got 2 guys that, I was big fans of in Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin. I think they're more vertical slot, deep threat options. Which one they like better? It looks like Marvin Mims, but Cortland Sutton's more of that bigger, big body target. Getting a guy like Emeka Egbuka, who could be that safe, reliable target, in the short to intermediate parts of the field to get that first down. I think that's a perfect fit for what the Broncos need. So you have that big contested catch guy in a Cortland Sutton, who's that alpha receiver, a vertical option in a Marvin Mims and or a Troy Franklin, and then having that possession guy who can just, get tough catches and move the chains when you really need him to, and an Emeka Egbuka. Moving on to 21 here, we got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I think this has got to be edge rusher. They need pass rush help, and Nick Scoreton just really feels like a Buccaneer to me. Pairing him up with Yaya Diaby, I think that's a really good pass rush tandem there. Moving on to 22 here, we got the LA Chargers, and it's hard for me not to go with a Michigan player here when the two really good Michigan players fell to the Chargers here. They need tight end and they need defensive line help. Colson Loveland, really good tight end out of Michigan, and Kenneth Grant, really good defensive tackle out of Michigan. I think defensive line's a little bit more of a priority, and I think that's what Harbaugh would think as well, so we're going to go with Kenneth Grant, who's a big athletic defensive tackle out of Michigan. Moving on to 23 here, we got the LA Rams, and I think this has got to be tackle. I like Alaric Jackson, he's solid. Rob Havenstein, or Havenstein, however you pronounce it, is up there in age. He's good, but he's up there in age. I think he might be on an expiring contract. He might have 1 or 2 years left. Either way, I think tackle is a really good option here. And with Ariante Urzuri still on the board, as well as Cameron Williams, I think one of these two players has to be the pick here. Cameron Williams is more comparable to a guy like Marvin Mims from last year, or not Marvin Mims, Amarius Mims. A bit of a raw athletic tackle who hasn't shown much yet, but has a very, very high ceiling. Or a guy like Ariante Urzuri, who's just really good. Might not be a flashy player, but is just a really good player. And I think that fits more what the Rams would like. So we're going to go with Ariante Urzuri there at 23. Moving on to 24 here, we got the Packers, and I think Benjamin Morrison is a much better player and shouldn't have fallen to 24, but good players fall in the draft all the time. I don't think the Packers would think twice about going with Benjamin Morrison here. Again, Jair Alexander is really good when he's on the field, but he's always injured. And besides that, they don't have that alpha cornerback. They got Carrington Valentine and, Eric Stokes, but they don't have that really, really good cornerback. And hell, if Jair Alexander can stay healthy, him and Benjamin Morrison, that's one of the better cornerback duos in the league. Moving on to 25 here, we got the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I think this is where you go with Cameron Williams. They most likely whiffed on Project Jones. He hasn't been the best in the 2 years he's, been in the league. Dan Moore is also... he's replaceable, and I think Cameron Williams could, probably start at tackle, day one. Whether that's left side or right side, they'd have to figure that out, but I think Cameron Williams has got to be the pick there. Moving on to 26 here, we got the Washington Commanders, and I thought a lot about going with a running back here. Marion Hampton would be really fun on that offense. Same with Caleb Johnson and Quinshon Judkins, even Travion Henderson. But again, this is a really good running back class. You can find running backs in day two. The only sure thing first round running back in this draft is Ashton Jeanty. The rest are, fringe first rounders like a Marion Hampton, Quinshon Judkins, Caleb Johnson, but more likely day two type of players. I'm going to look more towards getting pass rush help. They also need offensive line help, but guys like Ariante Urzuri, Cameron Williams, Will Campbell, Kelvin Banks, all of them are off the board already. The best option would probably be to go either guard or Jonas Savigny is still on the board, but nothing great on the offensive line. All the wells kind of run dry for first round caliber offensive linemen. So we're going to look to go with pass rush help here, and there's still some really good players. Michael Williams, LT Overton, Mike Green, I'm a massive fan of. But overall, I think LT Overton's the most deserving to go here. I think he's, again, a bit of a bigger guy, 6'5", 283. More of a 4-3 defensive end as opposed to a 3-4 outside linebacker. Either way, I think that he's a really good fit for the Commanders. Moving on to 27 here, we got the Baltimore Ravens, and again, they could really use offensive line help. There's just not really any first round caliber guys left in the draft. So with that being said, they need to help their pass defense. And you would think by trying to help the pass defense, you would go with someone in the secondary. I don't think that's their problem. I think the reason they give up so many passing yards is because they can't pressure the quarterback. And if you can't pressure the quarterback, you got to get a pass rush specialist. And a guy like Michael Williams, who's just an athletic freak that can rush the passer, I think him with Nnamdi Madubuike and Odafe Owe, I think Michael Williams could be that alpha pass rusher. Moving on to 28 here, we got the Philadelphia Eagles. And what the Eagles really like doing is drafting before the need becomes a need. When you look at the Eagles, their tight end depth chart, they have Dallas Goedert, who's been banged up this year, but he's still a good tight end. And hell, they even have Grant Calcaterra, who's filled in very nicely for Dallas Goedert. But I still think Grant Calcaterra is a second string tight end in this league. I don't think he's a starter, at least a top tier starter. I think Colson Loveland and Tyler Warren can both be really good tight ends in the NFL. And I just really like Tyler Warren on the Eagles. I think he could be absolutely amazing for him. Is tight end necessarily a need right now? No, they don't really have needs. the Eagles are just a stacked team in general. Why not get Tyler Warren to be that eventual Dallas Goedert replacement? Moving on to 29 here, we got the Buffalo Bills, and I think this is a pretty easy selection here. Walter Nolan is a very, very good defensive tackle. He's played very well with Ole Miss, a former, I think, number 2 overall recruit out of high school. I think he was behind Travis Hunter. I think Walter Nolan can provide both pass rush help and can stop the run, but definitely more of a pass rusher. Moving on here to 30, we got the Lions, and I thought about it. I really wanted to go with Alec Ayumanor to be that wide receiver 3 for them, having Amon-Ra St. Brown in the slot, J-Mo being that deep threat, and then Alec Ayumanor being that number 2 option that could just be a reliable pass catcher for him. But I think it's more of a need to get someone alongside Aiden Hutchinson for when he comes back. And like I said, I'm a massive fan of Mike Green. He's a little undersized, but he can get after that pass rusher. And you'll see that he plays for Marshall, so he didn't play the best competition. He's just so good. If you turn on his tape, he is absolutely amazing. And I think he could be a firecracker off the edge, opposite side of Aiden Hutchinson. So Lions fans, if you get mad at this pick, I just ask you to turn on the tape and watch him. You'll probably fall in love with them just like I did. Moving on to 31, we got the Minnesota Vikings. And again, this is also a running back team. They could go Marion Hampton, Caleb Johnson, Quinshon Judkins. I didn't have them doing that, but it's definitely possible. Instead, I'm going to get them secondary help. They just had terrible luck with secondary in general. And getting a guy like Jahdae Barron, who has played on the outside this year and was absolutely amazing. Played in the slot previous years, was really, really good. I think he could even play safety if you needed him to. He could be that Swiss Army knife, similar to how the Lions use Brian Branch. And I just know Brian Flores would use Jahdae Barron and maximize his, talent. So we're going to go Jahdae Barron there to the Vikings. And then rounding out this first round mock draft, we are going to get Travis Kelce, the eventual replacement, and a Colston Loveland. Is this a bit of a cop-out pick here? Probably. But I just think it's fun. I mean, Patrick Mahomes loves throwing to the tight ends. Travis Kelce's up there in age. Most likely will retire in the next year or two. So why not do a similar thing to the Eagles and, draft his replacement. Have him learn behind Travis Kelce for a year or two to become the next Travis Kelce. I just think it makes a lot of sense. It's a little bit of a cheap pick, but I think it's a good pick nonetheless. And then that's going to be the draft. Let me know what you guys think of this draft. Again, it's still pretty early in the, draft season. There's going to be a lot of changes. We still haven't gotten the combine. We haven't gotten pro days. We haven't had the Senior Bowl circuit or anything like that. There's going to be a lot of movement, a lot of changes. But this is, as of December 30th, my mock draft. Let me know what you guys think of it down in the comments. If you like the video, consider subscribing. And as always, I'm the Draft Nerd, and thanks for watching.